Hey guys, tonight we're stepping barefoot into the warm, sun-baked soil of ancient Nubia, a place where the earth hums with centuries of stubborn wisdom, and the river Nile doesn't just flow, it negotiates, slowly, firmly, and often destructively. It's the kind of setting that looks serene from a distance, smooth hills, swaying reeds, the glint of hippo eyes at dusk. But once the floods come, you'd better have your sandals laced tight and your floor raised higher than your neighbor's cooking pot. Because here's the thing, the Nile gives life, but it also rearranges your furniture, and occasionally, your entire kitchen. You're standing on the banks now, watching the sun sink like a gold coin into the water. Fishermen pull their boats to shore. Goats bleat with the confidence of creatures that have never heard the word evacuation. And above it all, families gather in courtyards and rooftops, not in panic, but with preparation. Because this isn't new to them. They've danced with the river before. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing the slow wave of sleep spread across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You crouch down and scoop a handful of silt from the riverbank. It's smooth, fine, almost buttery in texture, the kind of earth that's made and remade by the Nile's annual moods. And it's here, in this very mud, that the story of flood-proof homes begins. Because in Nubia, building wasn't just construction, it was anticipation. Every brick, every beam, every roof slant carried within it a quiet wager with the river, not if it will rise, but when and how high. Unlike modern flood zones, where homeowners scramble last minute to pile sandbags and file insurance claims, Nubians accepted the Nile's rhythm as a partner. And like any good partnership, it came with compromises, calendars, and an understanding that sometimes you just have to move the goats upstairs for a week. Historians still argue whether Nubian flood adaptations were the result of centuries of careful observation or simply the hard-won lessons of generations who had no other choice. But either way, the result is the same, an architectural style that's quietly brilliant, deceptively simple, and, when you really look, kind of beautiful in its logic. And it starts with placement. You scan the horizon and realize something. Nubian homes aren't plopped down like dice. They're arranged along gentle rises, just high enough to avoid the worst of the flood, but close enough to the fields to keep daily life efficient. That's no accident. It's strategy. A farmer doesn't just need dry socks. He needs to walk from his home to his crops without paddling there in a canoe. But not everyone gets the prime real estate. Some homes are built closer to the riverbank. These are more temporary, seasonal structures, designed to be abandoned or repurposed when the Nile stretches its arms. Others, especially communal kitchens and shrines, sit higher, like cautious uncles at a family gathering, present but keeping a safe distance. And as the night deepens, you notice the way people move in sync with the river. Tools are stored high. Floors are swept with particular attention to cracks. Doors are reinforced with wooden planks tied in clever ways, ready to be bolstered if the water rises faster than expected. There's no panic, just rhythm. One quirky detail. Some families mark their walls with tiny flood tattoos, little ink lines or pigmented dots that show how high the water reached in past years. They're not warnings, they're memories. Homeowners will tell you, that year the goats learned to swim. Or, here's when we made soup on the roof for a week. It's part brag, part cautionary tale. You sit now on a smooth stone, watching the moon ripple across the Nile. Somewhere nearby, a grandmother sings to a baby, and a dog snores with theatrical commitment. The flood is coming. But the people are ready, and so are their homes. The Nile doesn't sneak up on you. It announces itself, not with thunder or fanfare, but with subtle signs, a widening shimmer in the distance, a change in how the frogs croak at dusk, the way your neighbor suddenly starts stacking clay pots just a little higher. You wake to the familiar scent of river mist and damp grass. The sky stretches wide and pink above the valley, and you begin your morning walk through the village. Along the way, it becomes clear. Everyone's watching the water, because the ancient Nubians weren't just builders or farmers. They were, in a very real way, hydrologists with excellent cheekbones. Long before satellite data or warning apps, they knew how to read the river's rhythm. They watched its color shift from steely blue to muddy bronze. They noted how the reeds tilted, how quickly the fish darted. They read the banks like you might read a weather forecast, except instead of checking your phone, you'd lean down and listen to the frogs. The Nile followed a mostly reliable cycle, rising between June and September, with the arrival of monsoon rains far to the south. But mostly reliable is not totally predictable. So the people learned to read patterns. They paid attention to animal migrations, to how early certain birds nested, to whether the wind carried the smell of wet clay from upstream weeks before the water arrived. Historians still argue whether Nubians had developed a formal flood calendar, passed from elder to elder, or whether their knowledge was more intuitive, shaped by ritual, observation, and a deep, bone-level familiarity with their land. But what's clear is this: they knew before they saw. You pass a boy crouched by the river's edge, tracing circles in the mud with a stick. He's not playing. He's measuring how far the water has moved since last night, how quickly it's eating the bank. He marks a stone with a faint chalk line and moves on. Every family has their own measuring tricks. Some carve notches into the trunks of river acacia trees. Others hang strings with weighted knots. One woman, known in the village for never being wrong about the flood date, swears by a broken ceramic bowl half buried in the yard. When it overflows, she says, "You've got 6 days." No one questions it. You climb a gentle slope now, past the edge of the village. From this higher vantage, the land below looks like a living map. Patches of reeds, clusters of homes, a long snaking trail of water creeping north. And just at the edge, the tiny glint of raised brick platforms, the beginnings of the homes that have yet to be built this season, all arranged with the expectation that the water will come, linger, and eventually retreat. The homes here are seasonal symphonies, built not as permanent fortresses, but as dynamic shelters that respond to what the river decides. Not reactive, responsive. There's a strange peace in it, a humility. No one tries to conquer the Nile. That would be laughable. You can't conquer something that feeds your crops and bathes your children and once, famously, carried a lost goat all the way to your aunt's wedding. He became a guest of honor. No one asked questions. Instead, they prepare, quietly, constantly. One fringe technique you notice today is a row of ceramic jugs half buried at the property line. At first glance, they look decorative, but if you tap them, each one makes a different sound depending on the soil saturation. If 3 in a row start echoing low and damp, it means the flood will arrive within 3 nights. A local man explains it to you with a grin and a shrug. The Nile tells us things. You just have to listen sideways. And so, the village listens. Children carry news from one yard to the next. Elders gather on shaded platforms to review what the frogs are doing. And someone, somewhere, starts reinforcing the inner threshold of their front door. Not because they're afraid, but because they're fluent in water. You return to your path, watching as the river glistens in the mid-morning sun. It's not here yet, but it will be. The soil says so. The frogs say so. And frankly, your sandals are already getting nervous. So you smile, nod to the jug row sentinel, and head home. There's a lot to do before the Nile arrives. You reach your doorway just as the sun is stretching fully over the horizon, the light settling into warm yellows and softening the edges of every shape in sight. Palm trees, goat pens, the slight hump of a sleeping neighbor still curled on his rooftop mat. But it's the walls that catch your eye this morning. Not just any walls, mud brick, of course, but not the kind you'd expect. These aren't crumbling lumps slapped together in haste. No, Nubian mud brick is an art form, a science, and a weather forecast all in one. You press your palm against the outer wall of your home. It's cool, dry, faintly textured with the impressions of straw. The bricks are stacked in a precise, overlapping rhythm, each one laid just off the edge of the one below it, like scales on a cautious serpent. This method isn't for decoration. It's for strength, flood resistance strength. Nubians didn't build defensively. They built intelligently. They understood that the flood wasn't a battering ram, but a slow soaking guest who overstays their welcome. So the bricks weren't just thick. They were layered with alternating densities of mud, clay, and straw. The outer layers dried fast, forming a protective crust. The inner ones retained just enough moisture to expand without cracking. Historians still argue whether this composite technique originated from local innovation or from a wider exchange of ideas with Egyptian, Kushite, or even earlier Saharan cultures. But the end result is this: homes that breathe with the flood, absorbing water in controlled doses, expanding slightly when needed, and settling back into shape like an old friend adjusting a stiff collar. The secret? Timing. These bricks weren't made just any time. Brickmaking was a post-flood ritual. After the Nile receded, it left behind perfect silt, mineral-rich, pliable, and basically begging to be turned into architecture. Families would gather in wide, cleared spaces to stomp the mud into submission, mixing it with chopped straw, crushed reeds, and sometimes ash to improve binding. Children would help by dancing barefoot in giant pits, which, let's be honest, was just an excuse to get muddy and call it civic duty. Once shaped into molds, often reused wooden frames passed down like heirlooms, the bricks were left to dry under tightly watched conditions. Shade first, then sun. Rotate, wait. Whisper encouragement, flip again. Maybe threaten one that cracks too early. You'll never be a support beam at this rate. And once they were dry, they were treated like the VIPs they were. Stacked with care, watered lightly once in place, sealed with a thin mud plaster that added another layer of defense. You run your fingers along the seam between two bricks and smile. You can feel the wisdom packed in there. Years of watching the Nile, adjusting the formula, moving the drying racks 2 feet to the left because last year's batch was arrogant. One quirky technique you spot is the use of broken pottery shards embedded at the base of the outer wall. Not decorative, functional. They help reduce splash erosion during heavy rains and add just enough irregularity to keep the water from pooling. You crouch and notice another detail: small holes, evenly spaced, drilled into the outer plaster at ankle height. Not damage, not a mistake. These are weep holes, allowing any absorbed water to drain slowly over time instead of building pressure inside the wall. You give one a gentle poke, and imagine the sigh of relief it lets out every flood season. Even the corners of the home are slightly rounded. Why? Because hard right angles crack, rounded edges flex. They don't fight the water. They greet it, bend a little, then hold fast. And speaking of fast, these homes could be built in days. Not because they were shoddy, but because the community knew the exact rhythm of construction. Families helping families, elders eyeing the slope, young adults carrying bricks with one hand and bread in the other. Some homes were built with double-thick foundations, what you might call the ancient version of a flood buffer zone. They'd have false floors that could soak up minor seepage, or even inner retaining walls in the most flood-prone zones. It was messy. It was brilliant. It worked. You lean back now against the wall, hearing the distant clatter of more bricks being molded. The river hasn't arrived yet, but the preparations have already begun. One woman passes you with a basket of straw balanced on her head. She nods, gestures toward the rising sun, and mutters, "Time to feed the house." You smile, because here, homes aren't just shelter. They're partners in survival. The sun climbs higher, and with it, the smells of breakfast begin to drift through the village. Roasted grain, simmered lentils, and the ever-comforting aroma of flatbread meeting hot stone. But your attention drifts downward, not to the cooking fires, but to the floors beneath them. Because if you want to understand how ancient Nubians prepared for floods, you don't start with the roof. You start with the floor. You step back inside the home you've been exploring, ducking slightly beneath a wooden lintel, brushing past a reed mat tied up neatly against the frame, and pause. The floor here isn't just packed dirt. It's elevated. A wide clay platform, gently smoothed and just high enough that you have to take a tiny, almost theatrical step up to reach it. This isn't just architectural flair. It's deliberate. It's protective. It's surprisingly cozy. These elevated interior floors served a dual purpose. First, they raised essential living and storage areas above the first, often gentle invasion of floodwaters, what the locals sometimes called the river's polite knock. Second, they created space underneath. And it's what's hidden below that really shows Nubian ingenuity. Because beneath many of these platforms, you'd find storage niches, sloped drainage channels, even layers of insulating straw or fired pottery shards to help redirect moisture. In short, flood bunkers in disguise. Historians still argue whether the multi-layered floor was a Nubian innovation or borrowed from earlier Nile Valley practices. What's agreed on is that these platforms were more than just places to sit. They were elevated zones of survival. And it's not just one per house. You walk across the room now and find a second raised area. This one with a woven basket half buried in its side. You peek in and find dry grain. No mold, no damp, just the whisper of good planning. Some houses even had tiered floors, where one level was used during the dry season and another was reserved for flood season. The lower tier might house animals or temporary bedding. The upper tier? That's for grandma's spices, your best sandals, and the family's only readable board game. One elder tells you this tiered design also helped with cooling. Warm air rose and escaped through ceiling vents, while the packed clay kept the lower levels pleasantly chilled, even during the hottest parts of the day. So yes, these platforms weren't just for staying dry. They were seasonal switches in a climate that demanded constant adjustment. You notice that the platform edges are gently curved, not sharp. The rise is about a foot, just enough to deter water, not enough to trip over during a midnight snack run. Some are even reinforced with wooden frames, usually acacia or tamarisk, buried just beneath the surface, invisible but vital. You sit down now on one of these raised sections, feeling the way it stays firm but forgiving under your weight. A child runs past you carrying a bowl of soaked lentils and climbs onto the far platform with perfect balance. No hesitation, no fear. The house is ready. Another detail. The cooking hearth, usually set into a corner, has its own mini platform, built slightly higher than the rest. Why? Because cooking during a flood still happens, and nobody wants stew that's been seasoned by river water. The fire stays dry. The pots stay steady, even when the world outside is sloshing. You trail a hand along the platform's edge and notice a row of tiny holes. Drainage points? Possibly. But one local suggests something more poetic. They're for the house to breathe. You nod, deciding not to ask if he's joking. Either way, the house is definitely exhaling confidence. And it's not just about elevation, it's about flexibility. These platforms weren't fixed forever. They could be rebuilt higher if needed. Sometimes they were disassembled seasonally, their bricks reused or reshaped depending on the year's flood level. It's adaptive architecture at its finest, without blueprints or building permits. Just memory, collaboration, and maybe a touch of stubbornness. And that stubbornness, you realize, is what keeps this place standing. The Nile isn't your enemy, but it does challenge your memory. How high did the water rise last year? Was that crack in the corner there before the rains came? Are the bricks under this floor the ones from your cousin's house 2 floods ago? Answers don't come from scrolls. They come from knees in the clay, palms on the plaster, and eyes watching the river's hips sway like it owns the place. Spoiler, it kinda does. You rise again, brushing clay dust from your hands. The floor beneath you doesn't creak, doesn't shift. It holds, quietly proud. It's done this before, and tomorrow, when the water comes tapping, it'll do it again. The light outside has shifted. It's late afternoon now, and the shadows from the palm trees stretch long and lazy across the courtyards. You lean against the frame of the doorway, looking back at the home's outer walls, and for the first time, you notice how they tilt. Not by mistake, not from age, but by design. Because one of the cleverest features of Nubian architecture isn't in the door frame, or the clay floor, or the thatched roof. It's in the walls themselves, sloped, angled, and quiet about it. To the casual eye, the walls might appear slightly curved, like the base of a sand castle or the sides of a termite mound. And in a way, that's exactly the point. These aren't vertical towers daring gravity to challenge them. They're gently leaning defenses, designed to survive the world's slowest, most stubborn intruder, water. See, floodwaters don't usually arrive like a cavalry charge. They seep, they swell, they push at your walls like a sleepwalker pressing against a door. Which means that walls need more than brute strength. They need strategy. And the Nubians had it. These sloped walls, often built at a 10 to 15 degree inward angle, did several things. First, they helped redirect the pressure of rising water down and outward rather than allowing it to slam directly into a flat surface. Second, the shape made it harder for rain or floodwater to collect and linger on the wall's surface. And third, they were simply more stable, spreading the structure's weight more evenly across the foundation, especially helpful on soft, flood-prone soil. You run your fingers along the edge now. The slope is subtle, but unmistakable. The bricks are slightly staggered, forming a taper that's both aesthetic and functional. It feels ancient. It feels intentional. One old man passing by gestures toward the wall with a grin and says, "We learned it from the goats." You raise an eyebrow, and he elaborates, pointing to the way goat shelters are built low and rounded to resist rain and collapse. If it keeps the goats dry, it can keep your house dry. He laughs, and honestly, fair enough. Historians still debate whether this sloped wall technique emerged independently in Nubia or was part of a wider Nile Valley architectural tradition. Some scholars link it to ancient Kushite temples, others see parallels in Saharan structures. What's clear is that it worked, and still does. You take a step back now to look at the full shape of the house. It almost resembles a pyramid that forgot to finish growing. Broad base, tapered top, stable, grounded, graceful in its humility. The slope also served another purpose: shade. The angle of the walls meant that sunlight hit the surface less directly during the hottest parts of the day, and that meant cooler interiors, less wall cracking, and fewer mid-afternoon meltdowns, human or otherwise. And here's something quirky. Some homes had painted slope lines, decorative stripes or faint patterns tracing the tilt of the walls. Were they purely aesthetic? Maybe not. Some families used them as flood markers, updating the pattern after each season to track just how high the waters had reached. It was architecture as diary, house as historian. Inside, the shape paid off too. Sloped outer walls meant slightly vaulted ceilings, which improved air circulation and gave the home a more spacious feel, even if it was, technically, a snug clay cube with a few strategically placed baskets. And it wasn't just the houses. Grain silos, animal shelters, even guard towers were built with similar slopes, not steep enough to tip, just enough to nudge water away and keep everything standing when the Nile got grumpy. You circle the house now, noticing how the slope plays tricks with shadow. In some spots, the angle makes the wall feel shorter. In others, it looms just enough to make you aware of how smart it is. Not flashy, not monumental, just clever in the quiet way that keeps a village from collapsing when the water decides to visit. A young girl runs past you, dragging a palm branch behind her. She pauses to pat the wall, like greeting a friend. "This one didn't leak last year," she tells you proudly. "Grandfather said it's because it leans like a wise man." You nod, trying not to get emotional about a wall. But honestly, it does lean like it's listening, like it knows the river's coming, like it's already tilting into the future, just a little ahead of the rest of us. You step back inside, the sun warm on your back, the sloped entry holding steady, not resisting, just outsmarting the water. You wake from a brief afternoon doze to the distant sound of footsteps sloshing, someone wading ankle-deep in the lowest paths near the river. It's not panic. It's not even urgency. It's just part of the season. The flood is almost here. You head outside, blinking into the soft gold of early evening. And as you round the edge of the village, you see something that stops you in your tracks. Not because it's flashy, but because it's so elevated. Literally. There's a cluster of homes built on raised mounds, not artificial stilts like some lakeside huts you've seen in travel books, but elevated platforms, natural-looking, broad at the base, and gently domed. From a distance, the homes almost seem to float above the floodplain. This is the Nubian version of "don't let the water in," not by lifting homes with wooden posts, which would rot, but by building the ground up first. You walk closer, your sandals crunching against dry grass and compacted clay, and realize these mounds are composed of earth, brick debris, ash, straw, and sometimes pottery shards, layered and tamped down over generations. Each new family would add a bit more, shaping and reinforcing the hill before laying down a new floor. The result? Elevated compounds that stay dry when the rest of the valley becomes a soup bowl. Historians still argue whether this technique was a holdover from earlier pastoralist traditions or an invention born directly from watching the Nile misbehave. Some mounds date back centuries, with homes stacked like archaeological layer cakes, each tier representing a generation's decision to rise just a little higher. One woman smiles as she walks past you with a basket of onions on her hip. "My house stands on my grandmother's kitchen," she says casually. And her house stood on her mother's goat pen. You try to picture that. A lineage built in clay, not just blood. And it's not just homes. Storage rooms, granaries, even sleeping platforms are all lifted onto their own private mesas. Some larger villages even planned the mounds in clusters, creating islands of elevated buildings connected by narrow raised walkways that peak just above the flood line during the wettest seasons. From above, the village would look like a network of clay lily pads on a green-brown lake, with neighbors waving at each other across the waters, passing baskets via boats or long sticks. One fringe method you stumble upon involves shallow moats dug around a mound, not as defenses, but as drainage channels. If water begins to rise unexpectedly, it fills the trench first, buying time for residents to adjust or reinforce entry points. It's simple, it's brilliant. It's saved more than a few breakfast tables from floating away. You crouch to examine one such moat. A few frogs have moved in already. One blinks at you as if to say, "You're late." Fair. The frogs always know first. The homes themselves adjust to their foundations. They may seem modest from the front, one story, flat-roofed, unassuming. But as you circle around, you spot the retaining walls, packed tight with mixed fill, some sloped, some stair-stepped, for structural strength. These are not precarious huts. These are mini fortresses of patience. You notice that entryways on mound homes are also designed with floods in mind. They rarely face downhill. Instead, they're oriented sideways or uphill, so rising water has to work harder to flow in. A small raised lip at the doorway serves as a passive barrier, annoying if you're carrying a jar of lentils, life-saving if the Nile gets a little too friendly. One house has a ladder leaning up to its entrance, not because it's a tree house, but because the family expects standing water by morning. You peek through a window and see the furniture already tied up or lifted onto bricks. Every year, the same gentle ritual. It's not fear, it's rhythm. And yes, occasionally things go wrong. A mound erodes, a wall collapses, a floor gives way after too many wet seasons. But when that happens, neighbors rebuild fast, sometimes literally on top of the ruins. Nothing is wasted. Old bricks are smashed and remixed into new mud. Broken pots are added to drainage beds. One man claims his courtyard has 7 generations of floor tiles layered beneath it. You don't doubt him. You walk back toward the heart of the village, feet dusty, heart full. The mounds don't make the homes flood-proof. Nothing is flood-proof, but they make them flood-ready. And sometimes, that's even better. The sun dips lower now, washing the village in that warm, honeyed light that makes everything. Mud brick walls, cracked pottery, even laundry on a line, look like it belongs in a painting. But as you wander closer to the outer ring of homes, the landscape shifts again. Here, at the edges where the flood first licks the village, you notice something peculiar. Doors that don't open straight onto the ground. Some are elevated, some framed with strange half-moons of packed clay, and one, quite proudly, has a shallow trench leading right up to it. Welcome to the surprisingly advanced world of ancient Nubian flood doors, and what you might call sandbagging, minus the sandbags. You crouch at one of the entrances. The door is modest, wooden slats lashed with reeds, patched in places with hide. but the bottom third is reinforced with an extra layer of thick plaster, a kind of clay armor. Around it is a carefully shaped bump, like a mud threshold that rises several inches above the usual floor level. It's not there to trip you, though that might happen. It's there to stop water from casually strolling in. Nubians were well aware that when the Nile crept into your neighborhood, it didn't knock politely. It seeped under doors, curled around corners, and found its way through the smallest, laziest crack. So they designed entrances that resisted, not with brute force, but with elegant engineering. One common trick: sloped thresholds. Instead of having a perfectly flat entry, many homes featured a shallow upward slope from the outside, paired with a slight downward one on the inside. This clever dip helped keep small waves and splashback from making it inside. It's the ancient architectural equivalent of a polite no thanks to river water. And then there were drainage trenches. You follow one now, carved low and narrow, leading away from a home's doorway into a broader channel that snakes behind the property. Some of these trenches connected to neighborhood-wide drainage routes. Others simply fed into soak pits, gravel-filled holes that helped disperse water slowly into the ground. Historians still debate how widespread these coordinated drainage systems were, or whether they emerged in certain regions based on flood severity. But one thing's for sure: they worked. A properly done trench, reinforced with tall nets or brick wall, could turn a flood from a disaster into a mild inconvenience with wet sands. You pass by a home where an elderly man sits casually atop a ladder, reinforcing the top edge of his doorway. His tiny bundle leads across the top corner, and daubing the box with fresh clay. And finally, when he calls down, it's not the flood I fear, it's the flowers that sneak in with it. You laugh, but he's not wrong. The doors didn't just keep out water, they helped manage everything the water brought with it. Raw, fresh, snakes, the occasional confused duck, and of course opportunistic rodents. So doorways had to be sealed too, especially at night. One amazing technique you spot covers the urban fragrance embedded beneath the doorway's base. At first you think it's decorative, but a young girl proudly explains it makes the rats eat more heavily, too sharp for their little feet. And the gems, the last one, kind of stylish. In some flood-prone homes, you notice that entryways are located on the second level interior. 9-foot steep, and ground-level door, just a loaded or slope ramp leading up to what looks like a lifting hatch. These are the homes closest to the river, built with the assumption that the first floor won't make you usable for weeks. That doesn't make it wasted space, though. It becomes temporary storage, or a very nice area for livestock. Of course, they make one of such second-story entrance. The owner leans out, tossing a bundle of herbs into the courtyard to dry. "Come back tomorrow," she grins. "You'll need a boat." And it's true. Some Nubians kept lightweight rafts or palm trunk canoes on standby, tucked beside doorways or hanging from hooks in the courtyard. A rising river wasn't the end of mobility. It was just a different commute. One fringe method you spot involves clay door shoes, modular footings that could be fitted into place before a flood, like ancient door stoppers, designed to seal the bottom of the frame. They weren't waterproof in the modern sense, but they bought time. Enough time to get the kids onto the platform and the lentils off the floor. And what about windows, you wonder? Most Nubian homes didn't have large ones near the ground, especially not on the sides facing the river. Light came from rooftop vents, interior courtyards, and, during flood season, a kind of soft glow reflecting off the rising water like liquid candlelight. You walk on, ducking under a low lintel to admire another doorway, this one wrapped with wool scraps and palm rope, probably to seal airflow or catch drips. It smells faintly of lavender and wet clay. Functional, familiar. You glance back at the path you came from. It's darker now. The frogs are louder. Somewhere, a pot clinks against stone, and a child's laugh rings out. The water's not here yet, but it's close. The doors are ready, and now so are you. The air smells different now. Not bad, just heavier, earthy, like the land is exhaling. You step outside again, and in the distance, a sheen of silver slithers through the lowest pastures. The Nile has arrived. Not with drama, not yet. Just a calm, creeping presence, like a guest you didn't quite invite, but have already set the table for. And here's where the story takes a turn. Because while the Nile brought water, and water meant danger, it also brought everything you needed to survive. And that meant Nubians didn't just endure the flood. They used it, integrated it, counted on it. You walk now along the edge of the village, where people are bustling, not in panic, but with purpose. Someone's tying up chickens. Someone else is dragging a flat-bottomed cart toward higher ground. And in the middle of it all, a woman is casually building a new wall, with fresh mud from the flood itself. Welcome to the architectural magic trick, using the flood to build flood-proof homes. At first glance, it seems contradictory. The river destroys things, right? Washes them away. But not here, not in Nubia. Here, the flood is also a delivery system, bringing soft, mineral-rich silt, perfect for molding into bricks, sealing walls, patching roofs, and refreshing floors. And so, just days after the water reaches the village's feet, Nubians begin harvesting it. You watch as children scoop wet clay into baskets lined with reeds. It's thick, clean, easy to work with. Some will mix it with straw to repair plaster. Others will shape it into bricks, left to dry on rooftops or elevated shelves. The entire village becomes a living construction site, humming with quiet energy. One boy drops a glob of silt onto a slab and pats it affectionately. This one will be a bench. You nod. That's the thing about Nubian life. The flood doesn't interrupt architecture. It fuels it. Historians still debate whether this integration of flood mud into building was a conscious strategy from the beginning or a lucky adaptation. Either way, the effect is the same. The flood becomes a seasonal renovation event. Where other societies might evacuate, Nubians patch, refresh, reinvent. And it's not just walls. You pass a home where an older man is reinforcing a rooftop with a new coat of plaster made from flood clay. It cools the surface, keeps out heat, and when hardened properly, it sheds water like a terracotta shield. Another woman squats beside a small kiln, shaping flood clay into cooking pots. A batch of freshly finished bricks sits drying beside her. They last better when the silt is fresh, she explains. It has the spirit of the river still in it. You're not sure if she's joking, or if it matters. One of the more surprising details, the flood helps clean and reset drainage systems. You see it as you walk past a courtyard where someone has just dug up a hidden channel beneath the floor, flushed clean by the first wave of water. They're clearing debris with a long stick and singing while they do it. And the homes themselves, far from just resisting the flood, begin to adapt in real time. Clay barriers are reinforced. Walkways are reshaped. Some households install temporary step-ups, mud brick stairs built directly into thresholds, letting people move in and out of elevated homes without tracking in half the river. It's not elegant, but it's beautiful. One quirky tradition you see involves mud tattoos, not on people, but on walls. Children press hands into wet flood clay, leaving marks that harden and stay. Not forever, just until the next flood. but it's a way of saying, we were here. We worked with the river. We made something. Even the livestock gets involved. Goats are herded onto platforms, chickens into baskets on stilts. But the ducks are thrilled. You've never seen such smug waddling. You pause at a home now mostly surrounded by water. A thin moat curls around it, and the family inside lounges on their roof, drinking something from clay cups and watching the river shimmer. One calls down, "Want tea? You'll have to swim for it." He's kidding, probably, but there's no fear in his voice, just ease. This isn't survival, it's seasonal living. You crouch near the edge of the rising water and scoop a little mud into your hand. It's fine. Silky. Packed with minerals. The same material that built the wall beside you. The step beneath your feet. The floor you slept on last night. The river gave it. The people shaped it. And when it dries, it'll be stronger than before. The flood has settled in now. Lazy and vast, curling gently through the village like it owns the place. Which, to be fair, it kind of does. The air is cooler. The frogs have multiplied. The reeds hum softly in the evening breeze. And from somewhere upstream, you hear the distant slosh of oars. But here's something you wouldn't expect. This is peak brick season. Because once the Nile has delivered its bounty of fresh, silt-rich mud, it's time to make bricks. Not just repair with plaster or patch a threshold. No, now's the moment to build entire homes, granaries, wall segments, benches, ovens, goat huts, anything and everything that needs to rise before the next dry season settles in. And timing, in this case, is everything. You walk past a wide clearing where a group of villagers, half barefoot children, half sun-hardened adults, are stomping in rhythm through a pit of clay. The sound is glorious. Squelch, squelch, giggle, grunt, splash. It's messy, and it's perfect. Why now? Because post-flood clay is ideal. It hasn't dried out yet. It's full of fine particles carried all the way from the Ethiopian highlands. And it's easy to mix. No heavy hauling, no deep digging. The Nile did the prep work. You just have to dance on it. Once the clay is sufficiently stomped and mixed with straw, chaff, or even shredded leaves, it's slapped into wooden molds. These molds are simple rectangles, smooth on the inside, often handed down through families like heirloom spatulas. They're filled, leveled off with a wet hand, and then upturned onto a drying mat. Population brick. A good team can make hundreds a day. Not that anyone's counting, except of course the one uncle who insists on making a competitive sport out of it. 12 more than last year, he declares proudly, and I didn't even fall in this time. Historians still argue whether the particular shape and size of Nubian bricks were standardized by community consensus, or simply emerged through generations of, that works, let's do it again. But one thing's agreed upon. The bricks are purpose-built, longer than Egyptian ones, slightly thicker, ideal for the climate and the way Nubian walls slope. You pick one up, still soft, damp, sun-warmed. It smells of river and straw, and it's surprisingly heavy. A reminder that this home you slept in last night, it's not lightweight. It's earth-turned shelter. And they don't dry just anywhere. The drying process is part of the choreography. Bricks are lined up in rows along rooftops, on elevated shelves, or in sun pockets. Those sun-drenched corners of courtyards where the light lingers the longest. A good drying spot gets morning sun and afternoon breeze. If it rains, which it almost never does, they're rushed indoors or under woven mats. Some families even hold brick blessings, little rituals where a sprinkle of clean water or a flower petal is placed atop the first brick of the season. Superstition? Maybe, But considering these bricks might be holding up someone's bedroom next year, it doesn't hurt. One quirky detail. You notice animal prints on some drying bricks. Not intentional, just goats who got curious, or dogs who decided a warm mud brick was the perfect place for a nap. Instead of tossing them, families keep these prints as good luck charms. There's one home with an entire wall of paw-marked bricks. That's Barfy's work, the owner tells you, pointing to a very old, very lazy-looking dog under a tree. And the bricks aren't just used for walls. You spot furniture built from them too. Low benches, shelves, even bed frames with woven tops. They're often plastered over or painted later, but at their core, it's the same process. Mud, shaped by hand, hardened by sun, standing between you and a soggy mattress. Once dry, the bricks are stacked under shade until ready. Some are saved for weeks, others are used immediately. And if a brick cracks, it gets recycled, soaked again, mixed with fresh straw, reborn. You pause near a courtyard where a small girl is carefully etching a sun shape into a still damp brick. Not out of mischief, out of pride. That brick will be part of her home's next layer. Her mark will live in the wall, invisible, but known. The Nile didn't just bring the water, it brought the building blocks of memory. And as the sun finally kisses the edge of the horizon, the bricks keep drying, quiet and purposeful, preparing to become something more. The sky has slipped fully into dusk now, deep purple, shot with orange. A few stars blink above the river's lazy silver sprawl. Somewhere, a flute drifts on the breeze, casual and a little off-key. You lean against a wall, not just any wall, but one that's warm, earthy, and lightly textured with the day's labor. And you look up, because as much as we've talked about bricks and floors and slopes, you can't ignore what's above you. The roof. The ancient Nubians didn't just build from the ground up, they built from the inside out and from the top down. And that roof, that humble cover of palm fronds and mud, it's doing more work than it gets credit for. At first glance, it seems too simple. Just a layer of dried palm thatch tied together, maybe with a little clay on top. But you climb the ladder, carefully, because it creaks like it remembers floods older than you, and step onto the roof to look closer. And there it is, the weather-resistant sandwich of materials, all cleverly balanced. First comes the palm thatch. This isn't your vacation resort kind of thatch. These fronds are stripped, soaked, sun-dried, then bundled and woven into tight mats. Each mat overlaps the next like scales on a fish, and they're lashed down with fiber ropes or thin branches from local trees. Lightweight, flexible, resistant to rot if you treat them right. Then comes the mud. But not just any mud. Thin clay plaster, smoothed carefully across the thatch to weigh it down and seal gaps. If the family had a good flood year, maybe they add a bit of straw or ash for strength. The result? A roof that keeps the heat out, stays cool inside, and sheds water like a turtle shell. You crouch and tap the surface. It gives just slightly, like well-packed soil. The edges slope gently downward, directing runoff to, yep, there they are. Tiny spouts carved into the parapet. Rain and flood spray have a way out, and that means fewer leaks, fewer puddles, fewer midnight wake-ups with cold drips on your forehead. Historians still argue whether these roof techniques were innovations of Nubian builders or adaptations from neighboring Nile cultures. Either way, they're tailored perfectly to the land, hot, dry seasons broken by soaking floods. The roof survives both, and it does so with graceful simplicity. One woman nearby is recoating her roof with fresh clay, just a thin new layer using a broom of bound reeds. She hums while she works. Each stroke spreads evenly, almost meditatively, This is not a chore. It's part of the cycle. You ask her how often it needs to be done. She shrugs. When the rain stops being polite. Fair enough. Another man shows you his ventilation trick. A small opening near the back wall, just under the roofline, which channels hot air out during the day and pulls in cooler breeze at night. It's the ancient cousin of central air, minus the humming machine. Add a woven curtain? You've got a privacy filter with passive airflow. One quirky rooftop structure catches your eye. A clay dome, about the size of a breadbasket, with holes punched all over. A child explains, quite proudly, that it's for drying spices, paprika, coriander, and something that smells faintly of citrus and sunburn. The dome collects heat during the day and radiates it at night, keeping the herbs fragrant, but not fried. And rooftops weren't just functional. They were social. This one has a mat rolled out, 2 cushions, and a pot of tea gently cooling. Families gather here to escape the warmth inside, to watch the floodwaters shimmer, to tell stories, laugh, argue about goats, and sometimes sleep under the stars when the night is too beautiful to ignore. And of course, rooftops were temporary storage during the flood. You glance around and see baskets, wrapped bundles, even an old spearhead glinting under a reed mat. No one panics when the water rises, but they do move the onions upstairs. You settle onto the mat, sipping a small cup of lentil tea offered by a grandmother who appears from the shadows like a magician. She gestures up. That roof has been patched every flood season since my mother's time, she says. It doesn't remember a year without it. There's something comforting about that. A roof not trying to be perfect, just trying to be ready. To bend, not break. To patch itself with river clay and still catch the breeze. The stars multiply overhead. The breeze picks up, carrying the scent of palm, mud, and tea. You rest your back against a cool wall, protected by the most low-tech, high-function roof you've ever known. And as the flood murmurs in the distance, the house breathes around you. Quiet, sloped, sealed, and somehow alive. The tea is warm in your belly now, and the roof under your mat feels cool and sturdy. You could stay here all night, but the sound of a mortar and pestle below calls you down. Rhythmic thumping, punctuated by bursts of laughter and the occasional goat objection. You descend the ladder, stepping into the heart of the home, the kitchen, or at least what passes for one during flood season. Because in a Nubian household, the kitchen isn't just a room, it's a strategy. And when the water comes calling, it's the kitchen that proves how clever a house can be. You duck inside and find the cooking zone already active. Clay pots line a narrow shelf carved into the wall, while a shallow fire pit rests just above floor level on a mini platform of bricks. The platform isn't fancy, just a raised slab, maybe 8 inches up. But it's enough to keep the coals dry and the soup from turning into fish bait. One woman stirs a pot with one hand and shoos a curious cat with the other. She gestures toward the elevated hearth. She likes the heat, but she won't like the splash. You laugh, and she offers you a piece of something soft and spiced, probably bread made from flood-harvested grain, stored in sealed pots, and kept in the driest part of the room. Not that there are many wet parts. This kitchen was built to stay above the chaos. And it's not just the cooking area. You notice that all the food prep zones are elevated. Stone slabs, thick pottery tables, even a basket that's been cleverly strung between 2 wall hooks to act as a mid-air pantry. There's an art to it. Keep it high enough to avoid damp, but low enough to reach during a quick escape with a boiling pot. Historians still argue whether these flood season kitchens were adaptations from seasonal nomads or a long-evolving Nubian tradition passed through generations of patient practice. Either way, the result is unmistakable: kitchens that cook during the storm. One particularly clever feature you spot is a movable drain channel, a small groove lined with smooth pebbles that leads from the wash area to a clay pipe exiting the back of the house. The entire thing is sloped just enough to guide water out, not in. If you didn't know what to look for, you'd miss it completely. There's also a filtering jar near the door, an earthen pot filled with layers of sand, charcoal, and fine cloth. Rainwater collected from the rooftop is poured in, and what comes out the bottom is clean enough for cooking, washing, and the occasional skeptical sip. And just above that, a hanging shelf built of reeds and tied with palm cord, holding a small bowl of salt and a clutch of dried herbs. If the water rises fast, that shelf stays dry. It also smells amazing. Even food waste has a role to play. Scraps are tossed into sealed clay bins at the far edge of the kitchen, which are eventually emptied into the floodwater at carefully chosen outflow points. It's not waste. It's compost in waiting. Come dry season, those same areas will grow green, lush, and surprisingly pungent. One boy proudly shows you his family's emergency firewood stash, tucked into a hollow brick cavity behind the stove. He taps it twice and grins. 3 days of cooking, even if the water comes inside. You nod, deeply impressed. A flood-proof pantry with kindling? That's advanced planning with a side of smug. You also notice that many kitchen walls are decorated with reddish pigment, not just for beauty, but for mold detection. The color changes slightly when damp, signaling areas that need replastering before mold can settle in. A grandmother gestures to one spot and says, "That corner's lying again." Then she flicks water at it, just to be sure. You love it here. The kitchen feels like the nerve center of the home, practical, protective, and pulsing with quiet confidence. No fancy gadgets, no steel counters, just bricks, mud, clay, fire, and know-how. You don't need waterproof panels when your walls can outsmart the river. And when mealtime comes, it's all portable. Dishes are clay, platters are palm. Everything can be passed upstairs or out the door if needed. You eat with your hands, not because it's rustic, but because it's easy to carry a bowl when the floor might float. One quirky feature? A small floating tray made from bundled reeds, shaped like a giant lily pad. During floods, it acts as a mobile table, keeping cups, bread, and tea afloat and upright, even as the courtyard takes on water. You're offered more food, which you accept because it smells incredible. And as you sit on a raised stool, bowl in hand, the water laps just beyond the doorway. Peaceful, not a threat, just part of the meal. Because in Nubia, even the kitchen learned how to swim. After the meal, the family disperses like steam, some to the roof, some to the courtyard, one to a very determined game of pebble toss in a half-flooded alley. You linger behind, bowl still warm in your hands, until someone points to the floor with a knowing smile. "Step carefully," she says. The house listens through the ground. At first, that sounds like poetry, but then you feel it. The subtle slope beneath your feet, the slight give of packed clay, and the faintest sense of motion when someone walks across the room. Not unstable, not loose, just alive. Because in a Nubian home, even the floor is in conversation with the flood. You crouch and run your fingers along the surface. It's smooth, cool, and just a little damp, but not in the worrying way. It's deliberate. The floor here is made of compacted earth and clay, smoothed into a kind of soft stone that doesn't crack under pressure or soak like a sponge. And beneath it, a hidden system of drains and slopes designed to take whatever the Nile throws at it and send it, politely, back outside. One woman taps her heel against a slightly raised edge near the wall. That's where it starts, she says. You can feel it when the water creeps in. And you do. The floor is gently sloped, not so much that you'd notice while walking, but just enough to nudge moisture toward a drainage trench tucked beneath the far corner of the room. It's like gravity with manners. Historians still debate how formalized these drainage systems were. Some argue they were planned meticulously by elders with long memories and sharper knees, while others believe they evolved naturally from trial, error, and a few unfortunate soggy winters. Either way, they work. You find one such floor drain beneath a woven mat, nearly invisible until lifted. It's nothing fancy, just a small clay-lined hole, gently curved to prevent clogging, leading to a buried outflow trench. But it's dry, very dry, which means it's doing its job, and it's not the only secret hiding underfoot. You're shown a false floor cavity, a shallow pit lined with straw and flat stones, just beneath the sleeping area. During the flood season, it serves as a kind of moisture buffer, absorbing the air's dampness and protecting blankets and baskets above. When the water recedes, it's cleaned, dried, and resealed. No muss, no mildew. Another homeowner has taken things a step further. Her floor is patterned, alternating squares of lighter and darker clay, each slightly different in texture. You can feel the damp rise before you see it, she explains, brushing her toes across a darker tile. This one darkens first. It's the tattletale. Even more impressive, in some homes, floors are built with sand and ash pockets, hidden beneath the top layer. These act like sponges and filters, soaking up water without letting it sit and spoil. It's a system born of necessity, but it rivals modern moisture barriers in design and effectiveness. There's something almost magical about it, how the floor becomes both a defense system and a storyteller, a surface that gives just enough to protect what's above, while whispering hints about what's rising below. You also notice the floor is quiet. No creaks, no hollows, no cold slap of stone. It muffles footsteps. It encourages bare feet. It feels safe, like lying on the belly of a sleeping animal. Big, steady, warm. And then, of course, there's the ritual of maintenance. After each flood season, the top layer is scraped, remudded, and sometimes repatterned. Children help smooth it with flat stones. Adults add new plaster made from fresh Nile clay. Some families leave faint decorative swirls or thumbprints near the corners, as if to say, "We were here. We cared." You spot one family's mark near the hearth, a simple spiral pressed into wet clay with a curved stick. The mother smiles. "My grandmother's. We remake it every time." There's one more trick you discover: floor cooling. Some rooms have tiny clay jars embedded at floor level, open-mouthed and tucked into shadowy corners. These jars are filled with cool water during the day. As air moves across their necks, it chills slightly and drifts along the floor, keeping the room bearable, even when the sun threatens to bake the bricks outside. You rest your hand flat now, palm against the packed clay. It doesn't sweat. It doesn't shift. It holds you like it's been expecting you. In this home, the floor isn't just the place where things sit. It's the foundation of flood survival. Flexible, responsive, and full of secrets. And tonight, as the water presses just a little closer to the door, the floor listens. And it holds. The frogs are louder now. Their chorus echoes between the homes like tiny throats full of prophecy. And you've learned by now, when the frogs start harmonizing in 3 tones, it's best to check your courtyard. So you do. And what you find is not panic, not mess, not even puddles, just stillness, and the graceful genius of the Nubian courtyard quietly at work. You step outside, barefoot on smooth clay, and notice the ground here feels different, more porous, more yielding. This isn't decorative, it's deliberate. Because in a Nubian flood-proof home, the courtyard isn't just an outdoor room. It's a pressure valve, a place that breathes, drains, absorbs, and redirects. You look around. The courtyard is modest, maybe 20 feet across, bordered by low walls and a few flat-topped benches. A fig tree leans lazily from one corner. A clay basin sits near the edge, half filled with tools. And right in the middle, a gentle depression in the ground, so subtle you might think it was an accident. It's not. That dip is the flood belly, the catch zone, the sacrificial bowl. When the Nile spills into the village, the courtyard is where it comes first, and where it's allowed to rest, settle, and not ruin everything else. Some of these courtyards are lined with coarse sand and straw, raked daily into a shallow spiral that helps guide water toward the center. Others are layered with old bricks, cracked, porous, excellent at soaking and slowly releasing moisture into the thirsty ground. You crouch to touch one brick and find it damp but stable. No squelch, no sink, just slow absorption, like the earth is drinking in the flood politely, one sip at a time. Historians still debate whether these courtyards were engineered with full hydrological awareness or just emerged from centuries of practice and observation. But given how well they function, the argument seems a little beside the point. These aren't accident spaces. They're architectural lungs, and they multitask. You see a raised cooking platform at one end, already used that morning, judging by the ash. A goat pen just above the flood belly's reach, dry and smug. A clay bench that doubles as a grain sorting table. The courtyard is the workspace, the break room, and the early warning system all in one. One particularly clever feature? Overflow spouts. Tucked into the courtyard's outer wall, these are low, narrow openings, sometimes lined with fired clay, that act like bathtub drains. When water fills the courtyard to a certain height, it spills into a back trench, away from the home's core. You find one near a jasmine bush. It's carved with a faint spiral, functional and pretty. Another detail: storage jars built into the wall. Not perched. Built in. Just above flood level. They're sealed with waxed fabric and contain dry goods, spices, maybe even a stash of dried dates. If water enters the courtyard, it might touch your feet, but it won't touch your flower. And if you're lucky, your courtyard has a tree, not just for shade, but for stability. Trees like fig or sycamore have deep roots that help keep the soil from collapsing during extended floods. Their leaves catch breeze, their branches cradle birds, and their roots whisper to the house, "Hold on, I've got you." Tonight, the fig in this courtyard leans just a little more west than it did yesterday. Whether that's wind, water, or mood, no one can say. But it's not just nature doing the work. You spot reeds woven into wall gaps, acting like a primitive lattice. These slow down water flow, prevent erosion, and give climbing plants a foothold. One has beans. Another? Just decorative flowers. Because function doesn't exclude beauty, especially not here. You sit now on the edge of the courtyard's center dip, your feet just brushing the surface of a shallow puddle. It reflects the stars, almost perfectly. And for a second, it feels like the ground has swallowed the sky. The family that lives here doesn't rush to drain it. They know it'll settle. The earth will take it. And if it doesn't, the overflow spout will. Either way, they're not worried. A child appears with a broom made from palm ribs and begins gently pushing a few leaves toward the center. You ask why, and he shrugs. The water likes the leaves, helps it find the right way out. You nod. Of course it does. This courtyard isn't resisting the flood. It's coaxing it, redirecting it, asking the water politely to sit here, rest here, before moving on. It's not a moat. It's a conversation. And tonight, that conversation is going smoothly. You linger in the courtyard a while longer, toes cooled by the fading puddle, ears tuned to the steady lull of distant frogs and the occasional splash of a neighbor stepping through their own water basin. But something catches your eye, a flicker of color across the courtyard wall. At first, you think it's paint. Then you move closer. No, not paint. Pigment. Because in this home, the walls aren't just barriers against water or heat. They're early warning systems. You run your fingers gently across the surface. It's smooth but not uniform. A warm ochre blends into a streak of soft red, which fades into pale beige. These aren't random swatches. They're intentional layers, each one with a different reaction to moisture. In Nubian homes, the color of the wall could tell you when something was wrong. This one, for instance, has a pale top coat that darkens when damp. Not dramatically, just enough to shift from sandstone to honey. A subtle alert. The river is close, it says, but your roof can relax, for now. Historians still argue whether this technique was originally decorative, symbolic, or diagnostic. Likely all three. Over time, what began as aesthetic experimentation turned into a flood signal system, one that didn't require bells, alarms, or late-night shouting. Some pigments were natural, ground from hematite, clay, crushed flowers, even oxidized copper. Others were traded, chosen specifically for their reaction to humidity. A few could even change hue with salt exposure, a sign that brackish floodwaters had seeped in through the wrong channels. And they weren't limited to exteriors. Inside, you spot bands of color along the base of the inner wall. One dark, one pale, one gently mottled. A grandmother resting near the hearth explains, "That line means we patch soon. That line means we wait. That one? That's just pretty." You laugh, but she's serious. These visual cues help homeowners know when to reinforce plaster, when to rebuild a wall segment, or when to simply relax and sip lentil tea. It's a kind of language, wall talk, and everyone here speaks it. Another home nearby has a zigzag pattern etched into its pigment bands. Not just decorative, the grooves catch small amounts of rising water, concentrating the color shift and making it easier to spot from across the room. You think of it like a flood barometer, painted in earth tones. One quirky trick? Some families embed dried seeds into the plaster, usually lentils or millet. If moisture seeps in beyond a certain point, the seeds sprout, tiny green shoots pressing out from the wall. Nature's most polite form of architectural protest. It's not rare, it's expected. A few homes even keep the sprouts going, trimming them like wall gardens. One man proudly shows you his bean line, a row of controlled seedlings growing at the 40-centimeter mark. "Means I need to check the drain." He shrugs, and then goes to do exactly that. You pass a house where the entire outer wall has a soft purple tint, a rare pigment made from crushed berries, apparently favored by the family's grandmother. She claimed it made the house feel cool and smelled like confidence. No one questioned her, and that's the thing. Color wasn't just utility, it was identity. A well-kept pigment layer said, "We're watching, we're prepared." A crumbling one meant, "We've had a rough season, but we'll fix it." A too perfect one? Suspicious. Maybe the owners were hiding something, like the time a family whitewashed over a bad flood mark and had to explain why their benches were mysteriously floating 3 days later. Even the kids get involved. You spot a small handprint in faded green near a doorway. Not vandalism, an annual ritual. Each year, the children press new marks into fresh pigment, charting their growth next to the rivers. It's part memory, part measurement. The flood reached here, and I was this tall. One woman shows you a jar of her favorite pigment, deep red ochre mixed with a drop of goat's milk and stored in a capped gourd. For when the water is gone, she says, to remind the wall how to be strong again. You stand back now, looking at the courtyard in its entirety. The walls pulse gently in the moonlight, colors softening as they dry. It's like watching the house breathe. No blaring alerts, no sensors, just a conversation in color. And tonight, the house is whispering, all is well. But keep your eye on the third stripe. You will. You walk quietly now, following the fading moonlight down a narrow path between homes, your feet brushing through puddles that don't mind you at all. The flood is steady, calm, familiar. You pass a line of stacked baskets tied together with rope and bricks to keep them from drifting. Someone's thought ahead, but tonight, you want to see something different. Not a home, not a courtyard, something taller. And so, as the stars fade into a soft lavender sky, you reach the edge of the village, where the land rises just slightly, and the silhouette of a small temple leans into the morning. It's not grand, not like the temples further north built by empires with more marble than mud, but it stands, solid, layered, and every bit as flood-proof as the homes you just left. Because in Nubia, even the sacred was built with the flood in mind. You approach slowly. The temple is small, maybe the size of 2 homes side by side, but it radiates presence. The outer walls are thicker, more steeply sloped, and made from a brick that seems somehow denser. These bricks aren't sun-dried. They're fired, and often mixed with ash or ground pottery to give them more bite. It's a temple after all. It's supposed to last longer than your sandals. And its foundation? Elevated, of course, but not just raised. It's tiered, with a wide base that tapers upward, almost like a platform pyramid. You climb the steps, broad, low, designed to shed water even while providing access, and find the main chamber still dry, even though the river laps close now. Inside, the air is cool and faintly spiced. The walls are painted, not with flood indicators this time, but with stories. You recognize a scene of harvest, a serpent curled around reeds, and what looks like an offering bowl filled with mud. Fitting. You walk along the inner perimeter and find something curious. A stone ring sunk into the center of the floor. Not a drain exactly, too polished. A priestess, sitting quietly near the far wall, explains, "That's the belly of the earth. We pour flood water there during first rise. It reminds the house it's alive." You blink. She shrugs. And sometimes it drains. We don't ask how. Temples like this were designed with sacred resilience. The brickwork is bonded with sticky, flood-resistant clay, often mixed with egg or animal fat to enhance water resistance. Some were even lined at the base with compacted crushed limestone, a natural barrier that softened with water but didn't dissolve. You find a series of slots carved into the doorway frame. Offerings? Possibly. But more practically, they're drainage guides, letting water exit gently rather than building pressure at the threshold. Every spiritual design has a secular twin. Historians still debate whether these temples were maintained by the same builders who constructed family homes or whether there was a separate class of sacred architects. What they agree on is this: the knowledge was shared. Techniques for waterproofing, wall sloping, and pigment warning systems traveled between home and temple, like prayers disguised as plaster. And it went both ways. Many homes adopted features from temples, small niches for water veneration, elevated storage modeled after grain altars, and even corner alignment with certain stars or flood dates. One woman once told you, "Our kitchen faces the same way as the goddess." You didn't ask which goddess. You just nodded. You look up now, toward the roof. The temple has no thatch. Instead, stone and fired brick vaults create a ceiling that sheds heat and echoes gently with the rustle of wind. A single beam of light shines through a hole near the top, both ventilation and sun calendar, depending on who's explaining it. And the most impressive feature? A flood alcove carved into the wall, shaped like a shallow bowl. Each flood season, water from the Nile is collected and stored here. Not for washing, not for cooking, but for ritual. It's cleaned once the river recedes, then sealed with a plug of scented clay. Right now, it's full, shimmering in the low light. You kneel beside it, and the priestess murmurs, "That water came yesterday." It reached the altar by sunrise, on time. There's reverence here, but also practicality. No divine lightning, no stone tablets. Just a system, a schedule, a way of building that respects water instead of pretending to command it. You exit quietly, stepping back onto the path. Behind you, the temple waits, not towering, not glittering, but anchored, unmoved. And you realize, faith in Nubia isn't built to resist nature. It's built to move with it. Like a house that listens to the floor. Like a wall that changes color when it's sad. Like a courtyard that invites the flood in, only to show it gently back out again. Even the gods here know how to build a drain. The flood rests now, just past its peak. You can feel it in the rhythm of the village. Slower, steadier. Not retreating yet, but no longer rising with the same quiet ambition. The frogs have relaxed into a lower register. Children splash less. Adults begin to talk about after. You pass two women on a bench, weaving baskets and trading stories. One says, "This year, it barely reached the old marker." The other nods. "But last year, remember? Up to the goat's nose." They both laugh. The goat doesn't. And it strikes you. How do they remember? Not with journals, not with scrolls or maps, with stories, with words, with architecture passed down by voice. In Nubia, flood survival isn't just engineering, it's oral architecture. You follow a boy carrying a bundle of fresh-cut reeds. He hums a tune that sounds suspiciously like the rhythm of stomping clay. He's heading to a home being repaired, new plaster on one wall, some bricks being relaid at the foundation. But there's no blueprint in sight, no diagram, just memory. Inside, an elder instructs with slow gestures, higher on the southern slope, less shade, more breath. Another calls out, "Tighten that vent line." It whistled last season. These aren't metaphors, they're design notes, passed through generations, not written pages. Historians still debate whether Nubians deliberately avoided written records for building knowledge, or whether it simply wasn't necessary in communities where everyone built, remembered, and taught. But what's clear is that flood-proofing lived in the body, in hands that knew the weight of clay, in backs that remembered the right bend of a roofline, in ears trained to recognize the hiss of water meeting brick. One young woman shows you her finger markings, not tattoos, but stains. Ash from plaster mix. You need more if the walls are older. You'll feel it. She smiles, not explaining further. She doesn't need to. You sit nearby as a small group discusses a future addition, a room that needs to be built before the next harvest. A cousin suggests raising the floor an extra 2 finger widths, like Uncle's house. That's enough for everyone to nod in agreement. No ruler needed. No sketch. Just reference points with names. It's not just technical. It's story-shaped. One old man tells you how, years ago, the flood reached the ankles of the cooking fire, but the pots never fell. Why? He asks, pausing dramatically. Because my mother rebuilt the hearth while pregnant with me. It knew I was coming. You could call that folklore, or you could call it a design decision embedded in legend. Either way, the result is the same. The structure held. Another house has a faint outline drawn in charcoal on the courtyard wall, just a rectangle and some dots. A teen explains, "That's how my grandfather showed me where to dig the drain." He drew it and said, "Don't ever make it prettier than it needs to be." You look at the drain, it's very ugly. It works perfectly, and the stories don't stay indoors. The landscape tells them too. You pass a crumbling brick wall, long since abandoned. The top layer has collapsed, but a single brick sits upright at the edge. Someone placed it there, not to repair the wall, but to mark a mistake. Too close to the bend, a girl tells you. The river likes to cheat corners. It's a warning, a memory, a footnote left in clay. You realize then that even the act of walking the village is an oral ritual. You follow elders as they inspect rooftops, stop to touch walls, lean to sniff damp corners. Nothing is spoken unless needed. Sometimes a hum is enough, or a slow head shake, or a gentle foot tap against a floor that's lost its voice. Even the children learn. They're given small jobs, carrying water, turning bricks, watching for insects near the vents, and with every chore comes a story. We do this because my aunt once forgot and the wall fell. This spot here, a crocodile once slept there. That's why we sloped the yard. Quirky? Maybe. But every story holds a rule, and every rule holds a house. You return now to your temporary home. Someone has adjusted the mat on the roof just slightly. Angle changed, weight redistributed. You didn't ask. You didn't have to. The house knows. The people know. And tomorrow, when the water recedes, they'll teach again. No classroom, just sun, brick, and the shared pulse of a village that tells its blueprints through laughter, memory, and dirt under the fingernails. The flood has begun its slow retreat, inching back like a guest who overstayed, full of stories and silt. The air is changing, less damp, more dust. Ropes are untied, bundles are unwrapped, and across the village, one quiet detail becomes impossible to ignore. The women are everywhere, not bustling, not rushing, just everywhere, moving with purpose, checking walls, testing thresholds, adjusting roof mats, scraping and smoothing floors with the calmness of a librarian rearranging books after a windstorm. Because here in Nubia, it turns out that the quiet engineers behind many flood-proof homes weren't architects in robes or royal masons. They were women. And not just laborers or helpers, but designers, testers, adapters, keepers of the house's muscle memory. You sit beside a young mother now, who's gently repairing a corner seam where the plaster bubbled. Her baby is tied to her back with a strip of cloth, dozing. She works with one hand and uses her heel to test the wall's dryness. If it crumbles, she'll know before her fingers touch it. Another woman nearby is recoating a raised hearth, carefully layering thin films of clay, letting each dry just enough before adding the next. You ask why. She shrugs. My mother said this way it sings when it's right. You kneel closer. It does hum a little when tapped. Historians still argue over the visibility of women's labor in ancient Nubian construction. Few carvings show them. Few written records, where they exist, mention them by name. But here, in action, they are everywhere. And they're not just following orders, they're innovating. You pass a woman tying reeds across the base of a threshold. She's testing a new knotting method, faster to install when the water rises. Her daughter watches closely, then copies it on the next door. Faster this way, she explains. Less chance the chickens run in and scream. One elder woman is revered in the village for her skill at wall listening. She can tap a surface with a stick and tell whether moisture has compromised the inner brickwork. A group gathers around her as she inspects a cracked outer wall. She frowns, presses her palm flat, and says, "2 more floods left in this wall. Maybe 3, but not 4. No one questions her. It's not just the walls. Women are behind the drain routes too, digging, adjusting, and deciding where water should exit based on decades of remembered behavior. The river talks differently each year, one says. You have to remind it where it promised to go. They're also the ones who measure, not with sticks or rulers, but with the rhythm of their bodies. Knees to ground, wrists to wall, elbows to roof beam. Too narrow, one woman mutters while relaying bricks. I sleep on my side, not curled like my brother. Even pigment mixing is a feminine-coded art here. You watch a girl grind color into the base clay, adjusting tone by eye alone. This one shows flood better and looks good next to the basket. Function, style, and storytelling all layered. One of the most touching details, repair songs. When women patch walls or floors, especially together, they sing. Nothing dramatic, just quiet, rhythmic lines. Some are about the house, some are jokes, some are nonsense syllables passed from grandmothers to granddaughters. You hear one verse. Patch the crack, don't patch the ghost. Leave the dream, fix the post. You don't ask what it means. You don't need to. And perhaps the most brilliant feature, the multi-use bench, a low, thick clay seat that also acts as wall support, floor brace, and emergency pantry lid. It's the woman of furniture, quiet, practical, holding everyone up. You sit on one now beside a basket of reeds. It's warm from the sun. A woman nearby asks if you know how to knot the reed loop that seals a jar lid. You try. You fail. She shows you anyway, once, then again, slower. Now the goat can't open it. She smiles. That's architecture too. And suddenly, you realize these homes don't just contain women's work. They are women's work, measured in laughter and ash, in palm fronds and elbows, in pigment stains and river-fed clay. Tomorrow, they'll finish the patching. The bricks will dry. The fig tree will be pruned. The water will pull back into the Nile like a cat into the reeds. And the women will nod quietly, already thinking about the next one, because the flood always returns, and so do they. The village is exhaling now. You can feel it in the rhythm of sandals tapping dry stone, in the way doors are propped open wider than usual, in the distant thump of baskets being returned to ground-level storage. The Nile, full of opinions and mud, has made its point and begun to pull away. But not all floods are kind, and not all years end with jokes about wet goats and tea on the roof. You walk the edge of the village now, where memory hangs heavier. A path leads you toward a cluster of crumbled homes, some still standing at half height, others worn flat into the earth, their outlines barely visible beneath new grass. This was the site of a bad year. The elders don't speak of it often, not out of shame, but out of respect. A season when the flood came fast, too fast, before the bricks dried, before the thresholds were reinforced, before the youngest children had learned which sounds meant brace the courtyard. You sit beside a sunken corner where a hearth once stood. Charred bits of plaster still cling to one wall. A woman joins you, laying her hand on the earth like she's greeting a tired friend. 4 families lost their kitchens here. she says softly. But the goats survived. Of course they did. And she smiles, because even in ruin, Nubia finds rhythm. When the Nile misbehaves, the people don't leave. They rebuild, not because they're stubborn, but because they're fluent in failure. They know it's part of the cycle. Every house is a conversation with water, and sometimes the river shouts. But here's what's remarkable. After a destructive flood, the community doesn't just patch the holes. They study them. You pass a wall partially caved in. The bricks have been marked, not discarded, but analyzed. A boy points out the line where the plaster failed. Too much straw, he says, or maybe the sun left too soon. Either way, they'll try a new mix next season. Nothing is wasted, not even the mistake. Historians still debate whether Nubian communities had formalized recovery plans or simply relied on inherited instincts. But the pattern is clear. The morning after a flood, the village is already learning. There's an informal ritual too, a first rebuild gesture. You watch as a woman walks to the center of a collapsed structure, kneels, and places a single brick in the exact corner where the wall once stood. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. It's a declaration. This house remembers, and it will return. Later, others join. The elders help sketch new corners. The children collect pebbles for the next layer of drainage. The roof mats are rewoven by the same hands that comforted the scared toddlers just days before. Grief and mud are mixed in the same bucket. And through it all, the community holds. You spot a detail that sums it up. A small arch of reeds, tied above a doorway with bright thread. It wasn't there last week. It's a mark, they say, of a house that has come back from the water, a badge of stubborn grace. Some homes change shape after a disaster. A room might be rebuilt smaller, or higher, or with a new slope to counter a surprise current. You find one home with a diagonal floor, the slope intentionally designed to direct any future breach toward the courtyard and away from the sleeping area. It's brilliant. It's a scar that turned into armor. Even flood tales are part of the recovery. Around small fires, you hear stories told with laughter and a little bravado. The wall blew out during dinner, and my stew floated to the neighbor's house. I caught the chicken with a basket and a prayer. Next time I build the bathroom on the roof. These aren't just jokes. They're lessons in disguise. They teach without pointing fingers. They prepare the next generation to recognize the water's mood and respond with wits, not worry. You walk now to the edge of the rebuilt district. The homes here are freshly plastered, the pigment still faint from drying. But the structure? Sound. You tap the wall. It answers with a low, confident tone. Floods may come harder some years. The Nile may overreach. But the memory of survival is stronger. And that memory lives not just in the buildings, but in the people who build them again. As the stars return, you sit quietly beside a home that rose after it fell. A child draws in the wet clay outside the threshold, not shapes, but reinforcements. A second slope, a higher lip, a smarter home. And the river watches, quietly impressed. It's deep night again now, full circle. The stars blink brighter than before, like they've had a bath in floodwater and emerged sparkling. The frogs have quieted to occasional hiccups. The Nile lies still, reflective, content. For now. You walk the village one last time, but slower. Not to study walls or floors or courtyards. Just to feel the rhythm of a place that's done the dance and survived. Because the water will come again. Everyone knows it. That's not fear. That's just the agreement. The river gives life. The river asks for a little chaos in return. And in between, the people prepare. You pass a home with every lamp blown out but one, a low clay flame flickering just inside the threshold. A child sleeps beside it on a platform, blanket half kicked away, mouth slightly open. The water reached this door 3 days ago. Now it's 4 steps away again, headed back to its channel like a tired guest. You take a deep breath. The air is soft, like fabric stretched thin. This village isn't tense anymore. It's ready. Not in a braced way, but in the way that comes from knowing you've been through something and will go through it again. A woman waves from her rooftop. She's tying herbs to dry from the beams, basil, wild onion, something you don't recognize but smells like lemon and hope. Her house didn't flood, not this time. We'll still recoat the floors, she says, like it's brushing her hair. Maintenance, not recovery. A few steps away, a man is stacking bricks for a new storage room. He hums as he works. He's not rushing. The mud is fresh. The wall will take shape tomorrow. In one courtyard, someone has set a small bowl in the center of the now dry flood dip. A fig rests inside, and a drop of honey. A thank you, perhaps, or a bribe for next year. The frogs croak once more, like an amen, and everywhere, the homes hold their silence like monks at prayer. Walls sloped and sturdy, bricks locked tight, floors quietly whispering, "We remember." You return to your borrowed bed, high on a platform, clay cool beneath your mat. The ceiling is low, but not suffocating. There's a reed screen in the window and a scent of ash in the air. You feel safe, not because the flood is over, but because everything around you knows what to do when it returns. The lamps have dimmed, the village sleeps, the Nile exhales, and so do you. Now sink back into stillness. Let your breathing slow like the river. Let the images soften, the walls that lean but never fall, the floors that shift but always support. Let the weight of mud brick fade from your mind and feel only warmth, steadiness, and care. You've traveled through a place where homes are not just built, but remembered, where each crack tells a story, each pigment mark carries a warning, each whisper in the plaster is an old woman's advice in disguise. And you've listened. Let the flood drift away from your thoughts now, its edges gentle, like a watercolor line washing out into still paper. No threat, no urgency, just movement, just rhythm. The people are safe, their baskets are dry, the babies are fed, the goats, those opinionated flood veterans, are already snoring in their rooftop corners. You're part of it now, part of the soft brickwork of memory. You've walked the raised floors, touched the weeping walls, stood in the flood belly and trusted the drain. You've knelt beside the cracked corner that still held. You know, so let the house hold you too. Let the flood go. Let the song end in silence, and sleep